World Trade Center, 1,300 feet tall. If I dropped an animal off the top of the building, it would take 12.8 seconds to fall. Speed is 33, 66, 99, 132, and so on. So it took 12.8 seconds under acceleration to hit the concrete. World Trade Center fell down in 4.8 seconds. What's wrong with this? This thing's made out of concrete, steel, and glass. And they said, oh, they got a fire up on top here, 82nd floor. But when the building moved, you had a center plume exactly 850 feet from center first, before the building moved, both of them. So what does that tell you? There's an explosion. Acceleration is a C4 explosion that accelerates hunks of concrete, steel, and glass in a vertical transmission that far away. And then the whole thing comes down. Now, concrete, steel, and glass, because I'm a metallurgist, heat treater, welding tech, and I deal with coefficients of expansion of gases and metals, so I can do heat treating on tool steels. 26 years experience. 6.3 equals hydrocarbon. So you got a hydrocarbon, and what's a hydrocarbon? Well, plastic is a hydrocarbon, like this pen is made out of. Concrete is a hydrocarbon. Glass is a hydrocarbon. Steel is a hydrocarbon. Iron is a hydrocarbon. When you add carbon to steel, it makes, carbon to iron, it makes steel. Then you throw a little manganese in there, give it a little nickel, make it ductile, so it's got flexibility. But this factor of 6.3 is unique. What is C4 explosive, or thermite, made out of? 6.3 plastic. When a 6.3 molecule explodes, which is plastic explosive, it only affects a 6.3 molecule. And what it does is, by an electromagnetic pulse, which is 1,300 feet round like this, it takes every single molecule that's in that of concrete, steel, and glass and reduces it to a single atom called smoke. Now, asbestos, which is lined in both buildings, is not a 6.3 molecule. So the asbestos, because of the shock wave of the 6.3 explosion, this stabilizes the asbestos, and that's that big white cloud that took off to the northwest when the buildings came down. Now, the exact second this took place, all of a sudden you got this is all smoke here. You can't actually see the building. And five seconds later, it's still, the building's all down in the basement, nice and neat, and the big packed down in the basement. Now, there were 13 buildings that were 30 to 50 stories tall around the 103-story building of the World Trade Center. They all fell down under their own gravity because they were caught in the gravity well, which took their concrete, steel, and glass and reduced it to smoke also. They weren't on fire. But you know, all these buildings around the World Trade Center were also empty when they went down. Everybody was told to stay home that day. And there's 50,000 people a day that work in the World Trade Center for 30 years exposed to asbestos in the walls. Gee, how's that for an insurance lawsuit for asbestos? Now, how are you going to pay 50,000 people for 30 years? Well, that's trillions of dollars of liability against the government. Because guess who owns the World Trade Center? Port Authorities in New York City, which is the post office, which controls the treasury and owns the money. Ooh, that's the whole United States budget in two buildings. That's a real eyesore. If you take a look at the two planes that both flew in and you magnify them, there were no windows in any of the two planes. They didn't have windows, they were drones. Nobody died in that thing, except the people in the buildings. Okay, so at the same time, we've got to solve this asbestos problem, and they got to bring this building down, and you got to do it quick. But then you want to blame somebody else in a different country. You want to go into Iraq, secure the 1/3 of the world's richest light sweet crude oil. And of course, King Hussein's out there killing his own people, and that, so this is a good let's be the good guy and stop genocide program. But at the same time, we need an excuse to drop these two buildings. We took them apart little by little. It would take years. They'd have to put a big plastic bubble over this thing. It would cost hundreds of dollars an hour for thousands of people to clean this all up. So let's cook up an act of war, get an act of war. So the United States military, 186 soldiers, were involved with the core placement in the elevator shafts of the C4. When the C4 is detonated, and you can watch the explosions go all the way down as this thing is coming down. Now, how do you take a 4-foot thick I-beam with a 2-inch web on it and turn it into smoke in 1 millisecond? You cut it. No, you don't cut it. You expose it to C4 gravitational wave. When the gravitational wave takes place, C4 has 85,000 pounds per square inch pressure wave. It takes all the concrete, steel, and glass molecules and reduces them to single atoms. So even though you're looking at a World Trade Center, it's actually a column of smoke. And every single computer that's in this computer in the building also is made out of plastic and silica, which is a 6.3 molecule. The only thing that's in there that really isn't is the gold processor. But once everything is vaporized, the gold can turn into dust and disappear with the rest of it. Now, what happened at the exact point of detonation? $12 trillion was transferred out of the World Trade Center through Honolulu, Hawaii, where one of my bankers is sitting, one of my students who works for the Hawaiian government, and monitored a $12 trillion transfer out of the World Trade Center into the Singapore Bank, the world's largest bank. So we had $500 million a year for the next 22 years to supply the war machine to keep the oil flowing from Iraq. That's what happened there. There was a bank robbery. Then he blew out the basement floor, and 1 hour before the World Trade Center was hit, all the subways were shut down in New York City. The military came in, and what runs underneath the World Trade Center? Heavy rails for the subway. They blasted, at the same time this went off, they blasted the basement floor, which is concrete and steel, in the gold vaults. And they stole all the gold from the World Bank, this is the World Bank. Loaded them onto the subway system, and that disappeared into where. So now you've got a bank robbery taking place. Now we have to go ahead and declare and blame it on somebody. So we find somebody in a foreign country who's got a lot of oil, and blame it on him as a terrorist. And 3,800 people died in this accident, where there should have been 50,000 people at the time of the blast. So it's just enough, just like Pearl Harbor, when 1,700 people died. Pearl Harbor was hit by the post office, which controls the military, but the military only bombed the postal ships, postal planes, and postal buildings. No civilian sites were hit during the bombing of Pearl Harbor. So it was a war between two postmasters who controlled their military. You see what's going on here? And then here, the Universal Postal Union controls the post office. The post office controls the military, which owns the C4. And the only section of the Pentagon that blew up and killing 186 men was Black Ops, where all the guys work to handle the C4 division. I'm a muster master for the Pentagon. So is Russell. We both got our treaties back in 1999 to protect all U.S. troops from any acts of genocide by any government in the world, and we would be called in to disqualify the contracts if they're written like this here to make them go away and protect all of our troops. So we're the heroes of the military. Even though we're mixed white with mice here, we do enjoy those privileges. So the World Trade Center, I'm watching this thing and I'm sitting there with a stopwatch again and again and again. It's 4.8 seconds. This thing came down. Somebody changed gravity. And being a person with chemistry background and coefficient of expansion is because I've got a heat treat tool steel, I know that 6.3 is the key. That was a smoking gun. And some guy driving a van into the basement or flying a plane up here, which heat goes up, so the fire was raging so hot it melted the I-beams, which created a collapse. Well, how is field oil at 1,800 degrees going to melt steel I-beams that are encased in concrete and insulated with asbestos in 4.8 seconds with a 4 feet thick and a half-inch web, and then do that to 1,300 feet of it all at once in 4.8 seconds. Even in free fall, it's against the law. It would take months for that building to melt itself down. So this year was a telltale to bringing both of them down and allowed me to put on a 1-hour program about how C4 was used to demolish both buildings. And everyone on this planet who's ever touched explosives, dropped buildings, said this was the cleanest demolition ever exercised in the history of demolition. To put it into the basement and not even make it fall over anywhere. Because when the wave collapsed, it took smoke and brought smoke into the basement. Now, when they went to clean up this big mess, while all that smoke came down, it didn't grab on to the asbestos. That got blown away in the wind and killed and contaminated 10 million New Yorkers. That's why I got all these lawsuits out there for asbestos with the lungs. So then, a few hours later, so then the Pentagon got hit. At Flight 93, they made a movie, they played you the videos. The 737 weighs 238 tons. Titanium blades on the engines are ceramically coated. It's 4,800 degrees to melt one of those puppies. And they're 180,000 tensile steel, titanium. And there was only one piece of aluminum found in a crater 100 feet wide and 50 feet deep. Where's the 200 plus tons of airplane? The only airplane crash in the history of airplane crashes didn't have an airplane. I mean, come on. It's like the guy that lands on the moon. He's got a retrorocket to drop this 30-ton spacecraft, but he gets off the ladder and he's stepping in dust. I bet you there wasn't if they did land on the moon, any dust within 200 feet of that blast zone because it would have been blown away by the rocket. But don't worry about the 38 different shadows of the microphone that came down in the picture. Yeah.
All right, Judge, I got a question for you. Okay, all right. Based off what you said, how does that explain the cars, toasted cars, a mile away, the cars completely on fire with all the paper running that burning, or spontaneous fires popping? What the gravity wave explains how does explain the beams and all being wrapped and turned to jump.
Really easy. Really easy.
Okay.
Okay. Have you all seen the Bikini atomic bomb that's been on the Discovery Channel for 40 years? Whenever a hydrogen explosion or atomic bomb is detonated, there are what's called plasma walls within the detonation. So when a C4 detonation takes place, there's plasma walls that are created where the gravitational well is so strong that gravity can't touch the steel. And so when they go to test it, it tests to be 100% perfect. All the rest of the steel that was not inside the gravity well has been turned into smoke. And they just shoveled it up and they took it away as dirt or dust. So that's the only thing they tested was what was caught inside the gravity walls of plasma. And plasma is always created when a detonation takes place.
So that field, the plasma field, affected the cars that far away.
Everything, right? Everything that wasn't disintegrated was in plasma. This here, the 6.3 though, is the telltale to bring this tonnage into the basement in 4.3 seconds.
6.3, that makes sense because they had steel that was jellified. It looked like it had been pulled apart. The steel doesn't just do these things when, like you said, a free fall collapse happens.
Those things that were melted or heated or right on the edge of the plasma wells may have had some kind of a partial magnetic disruption within the molecules of the concrete and steel and the glass and made them spongy.
Okay, so this wave was bigger. It could have disintegrated all the buildings in that particular area, not just the World Trade Center.
No, it would have that was controlled detonation.
Gotcha.
So, but when you if something is burning up, how does it get 850 feet from center?
Exactly.
It's got to be blasted.
Exactly.
So both of them, this is all telltale stuff.
Right. And it also has energy once it fell down. First time when the energy comes from the brain.
So when I did this and I exposed the 6.3 coefficient of 4.6 coefficient of expansion of concrete, steel, glass, and plastic, and in 1988 I wrote the mathematical interface that all steel is plastic, all concrete is plastic, And all glass is plastic, because at 2200 is plastic, you can tie knots to anything. Steel at 1850 is plastic. Because of this one little thing. It's called the space center cube molecule. And all of these things have the same thing. Now you have a single nuclei behind below 1650 degrees. But above 1650, the nuclei splits and goes to the center. It's called center face cube molecules, which is plastic. Using all the chemistry in plastic, since plastic was invented back in the 50s, we then did the overlay of the molecule, concrete, steel, and glass, and I proved that all steel is plastic, changing the way all steel is manufactured in the world. And that was done in 1988. In my books, a study came from Johnson, metallurgy books, from the 1920s, 1930s. He was a genius. And then the Encyclopedia of Welding, which dealt with all the coefficients and all the different elements on the periodic table and how atomic densities come together. So putting that all together, I put on a 1-hour comprehensive program on this, and I proved it to the world. And that video was used by the firemen, the policemen, and the rescue workers to get a $385,000 paycheck for wrongful death. Or those that did survive still got the check because they were exposed to the asbestos as a settlement. Now, 3,800 people filed wrongful deaths, and they nom de guerre their names of the survivors. Nom de guerre the names of the dead people. And this is Mariano, got one lawsuit filed in quantum, the same as your foreclosures, about fictitious conveyance of language by the government. And she sued for the wrongful death of her husband, and she got $385,000. And all 3,800 cases were dismissed because dead people can't sue or make contract under Title 46, Chapter 1, Section 1.